Tonic circulation is by the common cardinal veins, and here the blood initially is brought by the vitelline veins, okay, and placental circulation, okay, this side. So this will be how the circulatory part, okay. So with the further development of these heart tubes, as the fetus grows, the heart tubes also, the further differentiation of the dilatations happens, and because of that, what happens is the loop, okay, it will fold. It will fold. So there is folding. So because of the folding, what happens is it forms a U shape. So the folding occurs mainly in the bulboventricular, that is the bulbous cordis and the primitive ventricular region. It forms a curve, that is the U-shaped. Okay. After that, what happens? The next step is this portion, that is the primitive atrium and the sinus venosus part. It will go behind the bulbous cordis and the primitive ventricle. Okay. So that is why when we see the heart, okay, from the anterior view, we see mainly the chambers of the heart. And next, what we see is the great vessels, because they will be forming from this region, okay, the pulmonary trunk ascending out. Behind that, we see the the atrium, the right atrium and the left atrium, right? So that is because of this. This goes beyond that, okay? So this will be the ventricular chambers, okay, from the bulbous cordis and the primitive ventricle. And this will be the atrial and that is the primitive atriums, okay, the right and the left atriums. So this is how the external portion of the heart is, definitive heart is formed, okay. So this is the basic understanding. So with this, we go in for the main things, how the different changes happen, okay. So how the different parts. Now to understand each chamber of the heart, basically we'll start with the atrium. So for the right atrium, okay. So right atrium now, any atrium, whether it is right or left, has got an anterior wall. It has got a posterior wall, isn't it? So how the anterior wall is formed and how the posterior wall is formed, we need to know. Okay, so what happens is, we will go by downwards. So first dilatation is the sinus venosus. So sinus venosus we saw. Okay, so sinus venosus here, what happens? Now if you see here, okay, so this is the primitive atrium and these are all the vessels opening there, isn't it? So on the right side, we had the right common cardinal and the right and left umbilical, the right umbilical and the right vitelline. And this side we had the left horn, no? So we have the left common cardinal and then we have the left umbilical vein and the which one? Vitelline vein, isn't it? So those will be there. Okay, so what happens is, and here between the atrium, primitive atrium and the primitive ventricle, this will be the sinoatrial orifice. Okay, so the transverse slit will be there. So this is how it is there in the initial. Later on, what happens is, there is regression of the left horn and its tributaries. That is basically what happens is, now on the left side, the blood coming through the left common cardinal vein decreases because an anastomosis establishes between the anterior, that is left anterior cardinal and right anterior cardinal. So all the blood is shunted towards the right side. Same thing happens in the lower part also between the two posterior cardinal veins, okay. So anastomosis develops and all the left side thing is coming to the right side. So whatever is coming to the common cardinal is less. So because of that, there is regression, okay. So with that regression, its tributaries also, there is regression of it. So it becomes small, this left horn, okay. Whereas this side, it goes on increasing here. And then what happens? So the left horn, gradually it becomes the coronary sinus, okay. So the left umbilical vein and the left vitelline vein, they disappear this side, okay. And the left common cardinal vein, it remains as the duct of Cuvier, or we also call this as the oblique vein of the left atrium. Okay. So here in this portion, what happens? This sinoatrial orifice becomes very narrow and it is guarded by these two valves, the right and left venous valves. Okay, this one. Okay. And so these venous valves, what happens is later on, which is right and left, okay, they fuse, okay, they fuse together and they form the septum spurium that we will see when during the development of the atrium, okay. So they form the septum spurium by the fusion of the right and left ventricular valves, okay. So, and these, the remaining lower portion, they will form the, we have the crista terminalis as well as the valves of the inferior vena cava and the coronary sinus, they form later on. Okay, so we will see that, how it forms. Okay, so now this coronary, now this has moved behind. Okay, so here we see this will be the coronary sinus. Here will be the right vitelline vein. It will form the, from the right vitelline vein, it goes to the superior vena cava. Okay, so from there we have it becomes superior vena cava. The right umbilical vein disappears. Okay, the inferior vena cava, it forms the right common cardinal. Okay, right common cardinal vein it forms. So from it is formed from the right common cardinal, that is the inferior vena cava. Okay, so this is how the different blood vessels which open in the posterior wall of the right atrium are formed. Now this is the primitive right atrium. So we will see now both right and the left, they are single chambered, isn't it? So how they will form separate, okay, separate chambers we will see. Now what happens, first step is, okay, there is formation of atrioventricular cushion. Atrioventricular cushion. Now where is this atrioventricular cushion forming? Now the entire thing, you have to imagine it as a 4-walled, okay, I mean all the 4 chambers like a single one, okay, single chamber, a single thing, okay, single ball you think. So it has an anterior wall and it has a posterior wall. Now what will happen from the anterior and the posterior wall? No, the cells will proliferate, okay, the mesenchymal cells will proliferate. They form a cushion, which we call it as the AV cushion. And from the right and the left, they fuse, okay, and they form the atrioventricular septum. So that is the first step. So atrioventricular septum. Now as the name says, atrioventricular septum. So what it is doing, it is separating the atrial chambers from the ventricles. Okay. So since it is formed here in the center, above will be the atrial chambers, below will be the ventricular. Now this section, we have just sectioned it like a coronal section. Okay. So this is how it looks. So above will be the atrial chambers, below will be the ventricular chambers. So this is the atrioventricular septum which is formed. Okay, and this canal, that is the passage between the right and the right atrium and the ventricle, we call it as the right AV canal, and between the left atrium and the ventricle, we call it as the left atrioventricular canal. Okay, now from the roof of the developing primitive atrium, what happens now? A septum will develop downwards. Okay, this is known as the septum primum. This septum primum will move towards growing towards the AV cushion. Okay. So this septum primum, between the space between this septum intermedium, that is nothing but the AV cushion here, and the foramen primum, the septum primum, that space we call it as the foramen primum. Okay. So this is septum spurium. Septum spurium is which one now? The right and left venous valves, they will fuse, isn't it? The right and left, that is the sino-atrial valves, they would have fused to form the septum spurium here. Okay. So from this, behind this is the venous sinus venosus. This portion is the atrium. These are the right and left venous valves. Okay. Okay. Now, next step, what will happen after the formation? This was the foramen primum which formed. Okay. Now, between this foramen primum and this sinoatrial orifice, there will be one more septum which develops from the roof, and that we call it as the septum secundum. So with the development of septum secundum, what happens? This foramen primum will grow downwards, fuse with the AV cushion. So because of that, this space is closed, and here in the upper part, it will separate from the roof. Okay, and this foramen which is formed now, we call it as the foramen second. Now this septum primer will come towards here, okay, grow downwards here, and this passage which is present between the septum secundum and the septum primum, we call it as the foramen ovale. So whatever blood is coming here, that is coming from where we had the right common cardinal, right, which is forming the inferior vena cava. So it is coming here. Then we had the vitelline vein, which was forming the superior vena cava, right? So all the blood which is coming here, little goes to the ventricle and most of it also goes to the left atrial chamber. Okay, so through this foramen ovale. So this is initially how the atrial septum is formed. So till birth, what happens? The blood is shunting from here to here, and this foramen ovale remains patent during the fetal life. Okay. So what happens next to these venous valves? So we had the right atrium and this venous valves. No. So what happened to that now? Right and left venous valves. So in the upper portion, they fused. They formed the septum spurium. Okay. This is the sinoatrial orifice. Okay. So this left venous valve along with the septum spurium. Okay. It fuses with the interatrial septum. Okay. So this one later on, it fuses with the interatrial septum this side. Okay. Now this one, that is the right venous valve. Right venous valve, what happens here? Okay, this portion, it forms the crista terminalis. Upper portion will form the crista terminalis and the lower portion will form the valve of the inferior vena cava as well as valve of the coronary sinus. Okay, since these valves are only formed by one, that is the right venous valve, we only see a single. That is why inferior vena cava, eustachian valve or the Thebesian valve which is formed here, they are only one leaflet is there, isn't it? There are no two leaflets. That is basically because it is contributed only by the right venous valve. Okay. Next, so here we saw how the posterior wall of the right atrium is formed. Okay. Now, how will be the left atrium posterior wall now? So now this primitive left atrial chamber will be opening posteriorly, okay, into pulmonary vein. Now this single pulmonary vein will divide into two and each of it will further divide into two more. So together they form four pulmonary veins. Okay. So what happens with the growth? What happens is this portion of these pulmonary veins, okay, as the chambers get differentiated and they grow, this portion gets absorbed in, okay, and the trunk of it gets absorbed, then the two branches, they get absorbed, and later on the divisions of it also comes and fuses with the wall. So with that, what happens with that absorption? The entire posterior wall of the left atrium is formed by the absorption of the pulmonary veins. Okay. So because of that, the two branches, the right pulmonary veins and the left pulmonary veins, they directly open into the wall of the left atrium. Okay. So this is the next. So now, because of this atrial septum, so usually what happens, soon after birth, the pulmonary circulation is established. With pulmonary circulation established, what happens? The blood from the lung comes to the right atrium through the left atrium through the pulmonary veins. So the right atrial pressure will increase. So because of the pressure increase, the septum primum and the septum secundum will oppose each other. Okay. So because of their opposition, what happens? The foramen ovale gets closed. Now this foramen ovale which is getting closed, it is not anatomical closure, it is physiological closure. Means functionally it is closed. Okay, because of the pressure difference is there. So it has approximated and it is closed. Anatomical closure occurs only by the age of 3 months. Okay, so you should be aware of that. So now, sometimes it may not close. Okay, so if it doesn't close, what can happen? Now this here, now this is was the AV cushion which formed the septum intermedium. This is the septum primum. So we see the different kinds of septal defects. This is the septum primum defect because the foramen primum remain patent. This is the septum secundum because foramen secundum defect remain patent. And this is persistent foramen ovale. So all these are different types of atrial septal defects or ASD. Okay. Then sometimes premature closure of foramen ovale. I told you. So functionally it closes by at the time of birth and anatomically it closes, okay, by the age of 3 months. So you should know that. So okay, cortilocular is biventricular or common atrium. So there will be a single atrial chamber. So the septum doesn't develop itself. Okay. So all these are different types of atrial septal defects. So we have to know. So basically, what is the entire process of development? So what all things you should know? Basically, the heart tube. Okay. And what are the different? Okay, so basically formation. So in the, that is the cardiogenic area. From the cardiogenic area, we have two endothelial tubes forming, isn't it? So these endothelial tubes further fuse, they form the different dilatations, right? Okay, and from these different dilatations, we have the formation of the different parts of the heart. Okay, so these are the things. So we saw how, so basically sinus venosus forms the posterior wall of the, so we have, see, one by one, you should know at least what structure formed what. So the left horn of the aortic sac, the sinus venosus formed the left horn formed what? Coronary sinus. Okay. So to this was opening left common cardinal vein that formed the duct of Cuvier. So here we had this right horn. So right horn here, what happened with the right horn? The right common cardinal vein is inferior vena cava. And the vitelline vein here will be superior vena cava. Okay, and here we have the valves. So right and left venous valve. So left venous valve, it forms septum spurium. Basically, right and left will both fuse. They form septum spurium. Okay, septum spurium, and they fuse with the what is that? Septum secundum. It fuses. Whereas the right venous valve will form what structures? It will form the crista terminalis. So that is the demarcation between the anterior and posterior walls of the right atrium. So it forms the crista terminalis as well as it forms the valves for inferior vena cava and which one? Coronary sinus. Then we have the primitive atrium. Primitive atrium is forming the anterior wall of both the anterior wall. Okay, anterior wall of both atriums, right? Then we had primitive ventricle. It formed the inflow part of ventricles. Then we have bulbous cordis, which form the outflow part of the ventricles. And then we have truncus arteriosus forming the pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta. Okay, this is the aortic sac. Aortic sac will be forming what? Aortic sac forms the arch of aorta, contributes to the formation of arch of aorta because arch of aorta is also formed from the left horn. So left horn of the aortic sac also forms arch of aorta as well as the left aortic arch also forms the arch of aorta. Then we have left fourth arch artery, okay, also forms the arch of aorta. This side, the right horn of the aortic sac will form what? The brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, so this is how the entire development will happen. Now, okay, so anomalies, we just talked about the atrium. So atrium, atrial septal defects, the septum primum, septum secundum, okay, persistent foramen ovale, okay, premature closure. So all these are the different types of yeast. Next, we go for interventricular septum. So how does the interventricular septum form? Okay. So basically, the interventricular septum has three parts: the bulbar part, the membranous part, and the muscular part. And all the three are derived from different sources. So first to develop will be the muscular part. Okay. So muscular part of the AV septum. So, sorry. Okay. So muscular part of this interventricular septum. So how does it develop? So the muscular part here, what happens? Okay. Median muscular. So this develops from the floor. Okay. So muscular part is developing from the floor of the primitive ventricle. Okay. So a median muscular ridge grows upwards from the floor of the primitive ventricle. Okay. And reaches up to the level of AV cushion. Okay. So this is present in the like this. Now this section, what we are seeing is we have taken like a sagittal section and seeing. So from this primitive floor, what happens is a muscular septum will develop, okay, from the floor. Next will be the bulbar part to develop. So bulbar part, what happens here? Okay, it develops from the right and left bulbar ridges, two ridges. Now, this is the primitive ventricle. This will be the bulbar part. Okay, so from this upper part, okay, so conical part of this primitive ventricle, what happens? Common ventricular chamber, two bulbar ridges will develop, okay, right and left. So they grow and approach each other. So they will grow and they fuse with each other and they form the bulbar part of the interventricular septum. So the gap between, now this gap, okay, between the bulbar septum above and the muscular septum, okay, this we call it as the interventricular foramen. Okay, it is called as the interventricular foramen. The last to develop will be the membranous part. So this gap, okay, between the upper edge of the muscular part of the interventricular septum and the lower end of the bulbar part of the interventricular septum, what happens here? It is filled by the proliferation of tissue from the right side of the AV cushion. Okay, so this is developed from three sources. One is the right AV cushion and the right and left bulbar ridges. Okay, right AV cushion and right and left bulbar ridges. So it is derived from these three parts. So all these three later on fuse together and they form the ventricular septum. Okay, so if this ventricular septum doesn't form, basically which portion, the membranous portion doesn't form, it results in ventricular septal defect. Okay, so usually ventricular septal defect forms a part of many syndromes. One is Fallot's tetralogy. So Fallot's tetralogy, what happens here? Okay, so there is stenosis. Now this is the pulmonary trunk. So it is stenosed, it becomes very narrowed, right? So it is stenosis of pulmonary trunk happens. Okay, there is ventricular septal defect. Overriding of the aorta means the aorta, ascending aorta, it shifts this side. And there is right ventricular hypertrophy. Okay, because blood cannot go here to this. Okay, and this is shifted this side. So there is right ventricular hypertrophy. So this is four features. It's as commonly as the MCQ or a 3-mark question for tetralogy. The other thing is transposition of great vessels. Transposition means the shifting. So pulmonary trunk opens into the left ventricle and ascending aorta opens into the right ventricle. So this is tetralogy already we discussed. Okay. So aorta is misaligned there. There is thickening and stenosis. Right ventricle becomes thick. Ventricular septal defect is here. Okay. So source of development of interventricular septum. So three portions we have. Okay, three parts. So what are they? The first to develop will be the muscular, then the bulbar, then we have the membranous. So muscular forms from the floor and grows up to the level of AV cushion. This forms from right and left bulbar ridges. And membranous part is formed by these two plus the right AV cushion. Okay. So if it anomalies, you can talk about VSD, tetralogy of Fallot. Pentalogy of Fallot is ASD is also there. Okay, so that is pentalogy of Fallot. So you should know those things. Okay. Next, we go to truncus arteriosus. So truncus arteriosus here. Okay, how the things. Now, truncus arteriosus basically forms two things, isn't it? One is the ascending aorta, and the next will be the, which one? The pulmonary trunk. Okay. So now here what happens? A septum develops. Okay. So to separate in the truncus arteriosus, a septum develops. Okay, which separates. Okay, so there is formation of what we call it as aorticopulmonary septum. So how is this aorticopulmonary septum formed? It is a spiral septum, okay, which forms and separates this truncus arteriosus into ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk. Now it develops from two truncal ridges. Okay, so these truncal ridges, okay, in the truncus arteriosus, they develop. How do they develop? Because the mesenchymal cells here, they proliferate. Okay, so the mesenchymal cells, where do they come from? They will come from the neural crest cells. Okay, and they proliferate. The neural crest cells will come migrate, and they migrate into the wall of the truncus arteriosus near the conus, okay, near the conus part, and these truncal ridges will grow, okay, with each other, and they form the, what we call it as the spiral septum. Okay, bulbar ridges form what? The interventricular septum, right? So the truncal ridges are forming the spiral septum. So the spiral septum will be close to the conus. Conus part is that the part that is from the bulbous cordis, no, that portion. Okay. So here, when it is spirally dividing like this, okay, because of the spiral septum, what happens is in the lower part, the spiral septum and the bulbar septum, okay, the bulbar septum and the spiral septum will be in the same plane, okay, and they are continuous with each other, close to the ventricle. So here what happens because of that, the spiral septum is in a coronal plane, okay. So because of that, aorta will be pulmonary trunk will be in the anteriorly and aorta will be posteriorly. So if you try to recollect the heart, the gross anatomy of the heart, when you see the ascending aorta behind, whereas the pulmonary trunk in the front. Okay. So in the lower portions, pulmonary trunk is in the front, aorta will be behind. So in the middle part, what happens? The spiral septum will be in a sagittal plane. Okay, is in the sagittal plane. So here, because of that, the aorta comes towards they are side by side. So aorta is in the right side, whereas the pulmonary trunk will go to the left. Then in the upper part, again, what happens? Again, the spiral segment comes to lie in the coronal plane. So because of that, the aorta comes in the front, the pulmonary trunk goes behind. Okay. So that is how the aorticopulmonary segment is formed. So what are the congenital anomalies? One is the Eisenmenger's complex. Okay, Eisenmenger's complex. It is a common, especially in obstetrics. If this is Eisenmenger's complex, is there high risk of mortality to the mother. Okay, it is pulmonary hypertension. There is dilatation of the pulmonary trunk. Hypertrophy of the right ventricle will be there. And undivided truncus arteriosus because of the agenesis, means the aortopulmonary segment is not formed. Okay, so because of that, there is the truncus arteriosus is not divided. So it is associated usually with patent interventricular foramen. Okay. So VSD is ventricular septal defect. That is because of the non-formation of the membranous part. Okay. Then persistent truncus arteriosus. Persistent truncus arteriosus, what happens? The spiral segment fails to develop, okay? And both are fused to form the single trunk. Transposition. Already I showed you all these things. Transposition, how the pulmonary, this will be the normal type. Okay, this is the abnormal type. Okay, so source of development, basically what is the source? Source is the aorticopulmonary segment. Aorticopulmonary segment is formed from where? From the truncal ridges which are developed in the truncus arteriosus, in the wall of the truncus artery close to the conus. So how is it developed? It is developed by the migration of the neural crest cells there. Okay, and they cause the proliferation of these mesenchymal cells. So it fuses. So in the lower part, it is in the coronal plane with the pulmonary trunk in front, ascending aorta behind. In the middle part, it is in the sagittal plane with the aorta on the right and the pulmonary trunk on the left. And in the upper part, again, it is coronal with the aorta in the front and pulmonary trunk, that is anteriorly, and pulmonary trunk posteriorly. Next is development of inferior vena cava. Okay. To understand the development vena cava, we should understand this. Okay, so now what happens? Okay, to understand this diagram, so we have what we call it as the right common cardinal vein. Okay, and there is the left, right anterior common cardinal vein and right posterior common cardinal vein. Right anterior cardinal vein and right posterior cardinal vein joining to form the common cardinal vein. Sorry about that. So this is how it is. Okay. So similarly on the left side also we have the left anterior cardinal vein and the left posterior cardinal vein joining to form the which one? Left common cardinal vein. Okay. So this is the thing. So in the lower part, what happens is now both this, which one I told you, there is an anastomosis. Similarly, here also there is an anastomosis between the anterior cardinal veins, right and left. Here also there is an anastomosis between the right and left posterior cardinal veins. Okay. Now here we have two channels developing. One is which one? The subcardinal vein. So subcardinal vein will be draining the blood from the developing kidneys. Okay, that is subcardinal. Then we have supracardinal within that. Okay, so supracardinal will be basically draining the walls, okay, especially in the thoracic level. So they will be draining. So the posterior intercostal veins, those portion which drains the thoracic level be draining here. That is the, so similarly here also we have, okay, right and left. So basically we'll concentrate on the right, okay. So now this is one anastomosis. Now here also, now once these are formed, supra and the subcardinal vein, there is an anastomotic channel between the supra and the sub, okay. Then here in the upper part, we have the hepatocardinal, okay, hepatocardiac channel is there. Hepatocardiac channel is formed by the vitelline vein there, okay. It will form the hepatocardiac channel. And joining this hepatocardiac channel will be this subcardinal vein through an anastomotic channel. Now, all these are anastomosis. Okay, this one, these are all anastomosis. Okay. So once you understand this, now the inferior vena cava, it develops from three segments. Okay, so the development of the inferior vena cava occurs by, one is the sacral segment, then there is the renal segment, and there is the hepatocardiac segment. Okay. So three: sacrocardinal segment, renal segment, and the hepatic segments. So we will see which are those parts. Okay. So now the sacrocardinal segment, how will we define it? So this is the portion. Sacrocardinal segment is this one. So what is this segment now? It is the portion of what? The posterior cardinal vein. Okay. It is the posterior cardinal vein between the anastomotic channel between the right and left posterior cardinal and the caudal end of subcardinal. You have to just read this diagram, okay? Then you understand better. So this portion is the portion of posterior cardinal vein, the right posterior cardinal vein, which is between the anastomosis between right and left and the subcardinal. Okay, so this is the first segment. Okay, so this is known as the sacrocardinal segment. Okay, sacrocardinal segment. So sacrocardinal segment. Second will be this one. What is this one now? Sorry, supracardinal. Till here is the sacrocardinal segment. Second is this portion. This is the caudal end of the supracardinal part. Okay, caudal end part of the right supracardinal vein. Then third will be, so this is the third portion. Third portion is the anastomosis between the right supracardinal and the right subcardinal. Okay. Fourth is this one. That is the portion of the supracardinal between the anastomosis between the right supra and subcardinal and the anastomosis between the right supracardinal and the hepatocardiac channel. Okay. So this portion is the fourth. Fifth is the anastomosis between the subcardinal and the hepatocardinal segment. Okay. Hepatocardiac channel. And sixth will be this one. So that is the 6 parts through which the inferior vena cava forms. Okay. So the renal segment, we call it this one, because this subcardinal, I told you, it drains basically the kidney regions. Okay. So this is the known as the renal. Okay. This is the sacrocardinal. And the remaining, this one is the hepatic segment. Okay. So like that, the cardinal vein is formed. Okay. So if we take it, okay, just okay. So if we take these portions, this is how it will be. A quick revision of it. Okay, so this is the anastomotic channel. Okay, so this later on, all these portions will disappear. So this forms the here, if you see, I'll show you in this picture itself. Okay, so you will have here, this is the inferior vena cava portion, whatever is formed. Okay, the 6 segments. This will be the right common iliac, left common iliac, dividing into right and left internal iliac. Okay, that is external and internal iliac. So here we have the subcardinal. Okay, I'll just show you on the right side. So subcardinal. This is the supracardinal. Right subcardinal is draining blood from the kidneys. Supracardinal from the posterior thoracic wall. It comes mainly. Okay, so there is anastomosis here. Then there is the hepatocardiac channel and there is an anastomosis here joining this one. Okay. So the first segment is this one. Okay, so first segment is between the anastomosis, that is the portion of, this is the posterior cardinal vein, no? Right posterior, portion of right posterior cardinal vein between, which one? Between the anastomosis between right and left posterior cardinal and the caudal end of supracardinal. Second portion is caudal end of supracardinal, that is from here, caudal end up to the anastomosis. Okay, next is the anastomosis between supracardinal, subcardinal. Fourth is the portion of supracardinal between the anastomosis between right supra and sub, and anastomosis between subcardinal and the hepatocardiac channel. Okay, so this will be the 5th segment. 6th is this. So all of it together forms the inferior vena cava. Okay, so this is how. So you can see here. So the right subcardinal portion, this will be the anastomosis. Okay, this is the common hepatic, that portion. And these were the portions derived from the subcardinal. Okay, so this is the caudal part of right posterior cardinal. This is the right supracardinal. Okay, so These are all the draining vessels from the thoracic, lower thoracic. So anomalies. Anomalies, what happens? Sometimes double inferior vena cava. Usually the left side, everything disappears, but sometimes it may persist. And there are also two, and it will usually drain into the left renal vein. Okay. Then there is absence of inferior vena cava. So if you see here, only sacrocardinal and renal segment is there. Okay. Then it is going directly. This portion is absent. Okay. That is the subcardinal segment is not there. Okay, so the sources of development, basically, it is the posterior cardinal anastomosis, that is a posterior cardinal vein, right posterior cardinal vein, supracardinal, subcardinal, okay? And you have to talk about the different portions there. Okay, so with this, we finish today's class. So thank you for watching Auricle. So for those who haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe. You can, as well as you can download. And if you haven't yet downloaded the app, you can download the app on Google Play as well as Play Store. Google Play and both on Android and Apple Store, it is available. And for more social contents, media contents, you can go through the channels, that is the YouTube, Telegram, Facebook. Okay. And until then, and also I shall remind you of all the last opportunity. Today is the last day for the combo offer. So make the best use of it. Okay. So until then, next time.